Gosh, I didn't know I had that effect on people. Your Worshipful, the Mayor of the Borough of Harrogate, Councillor Trevor Chapman, and the Mayoress, Janet Chapman, thank you for joining us this morning at the launch of Wells and Swells, the latest book by Malcolm Neesam. Friends of Malcolm and members of the Civic Society, welcome to you all. Thank you for giving up your morning and joining us today. Behind me, on my left and on my right, are emergency exits, and toilets are through the door that you came in on the left or to the right. So my name is Stuart Holland and I am chair of the Civic Society. Malcolm asked the Society if we would organise this launch today, and we are privileged to feel that he trusted us to do that and are very pleased to do so. We've worked very closely with Hornbeam Park Developments Limited, who have kindly sponsored and generously supported this event. This morning marks an historic moment in the history of our town, when we will be able to to learn more about the second Great Chronicle, which covers the years 1842 to 1923, referred to as the golden years of Harrogate. History, though, is made and kept alive by those who study and record events of the past, and so that they're available for ourselves today and for generations to come. Harrogate has known and in some ways was founded by many great people, from those who served the mineral waters to visitors like Betty Lupton, to those who designed and built our great buildings and gardens. And whilst William Slingsby is known for discovering our spa waters, it was men like Richard Ellis and George Dawson, and working with the improvement commissioners, that gave us the town that we have and love today. There was one person who made many contributions to the growth of the town in the golden years. He funded research into the European spas. He paid for councillors to go on a jolly around Europe to look at the European spas before designing our great Royal Hall, which he actively encouraged to be built. And he endeared himself to the townspeople, and I wish he was still here, by roasting oxes on the Stray. What wonderful occasions they must have been. I mean, of course, Sampson Fox. How fitting, therefore, that we were to have had as guests today Edward Fox and his wife, Joanna David. Edward being the great-grandson of Sampson Fox and keeping that line alive. And a great friend, of course, of Malcolm. Unfortunately, Edward contracted COVID on Sunday and had to cancel his trip. He's written the following, however. Please express Joanna and my distress at not being able to be here in person to see Malcolm's very great achievement. And we hope the whole day will be a very happy one, and we send our devoted love and admiration, and will be up to see Malcolm as soon as COVID has disappeared. Best wishes from Edward Fox. We've also received an apology from our Member of Parliament, who's asked me to convey his thanks for the work that Malcolm has done in writing Wells and Swells. And he says, "I'm sure it will be a special occasion. Malcolm's knowledge of and passion for our town is just wonderful." From Andrew Jones. Our principal guest, of course, is Malcolm, Freeman of the Borough of Harrogate. Malcolm, through your research and your engaging ways of writing and presenting and lecturing, you've brought so much history of the town alive already. Your books include Harrogate in old picture postcards, Exclusively Harrogate, the Harrogate Great Chronicle of 1332 to 1841, Harrogate, A History of the English Spa, Bygone Harrogate, Harrogate in 50 Buildings, Music Over the Waters, the A to Z of Harrogate, Hotel Majestic, Harrogate Grammar School, Ogden's 1893 to 1993, and Rayworth's to celebrate their 125th anniversary. Additionally, you have written dozens, if not hundreds, of articles for our local newspaper and, more recently, for the Stray Ferret. Your research and work has been recognised by the bestowing on you of the honour of being a Freeman of the Borough of Harrogate, and I'm pleased to see you wearing your badge of honour today. Malcolm, I know the publication of Wells and Swells is particularly important to you. It has taken years to write, and at over 1,600 pages long, I often wonder where you found the time to research, let alone write this book. I'm sure your enthusiastic supporters in this room can't wait to learn more about the history of our town between the years 1842 and 1923. We're also looking forward to reading your third chronicle, which I know you have substantially drafted. But for now, I would like to invite you to take the stage and thrill us all with a whistle-top tour of the golden years of Harrogate, Wells and Swells. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm Neesam.
Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayoress, ladies and gentlemen, what a lovely welcome. It's really marvellous to me that I am able to stand in front of you this morning to witness the publication of Wells and Swells, the book that means so much to me, but for various reasons around which I doubted I would live to see published. Indeed, the sight of so many friendly faces makes me think I am attending my own wake, which is something that unfortunately I've had to consider recently, regrettably. But nevertheless, the book's out and done, in my opinion, to a very high standard, thanks to Carnegie Publications, whose representative Anna Goddard is with us at the desk this morning. Now, in the introduction to the previous volume, The Great Chronicle, I gave an account of how and why I'd started writing these big histories, and it may be useful just to go over that again briefly. And my first awareness of Harrogate as being a community, somewhat of a special one, occurred when I was a small boy, about 6, 7 years of age, And I used to be taken by my mother around the Stray on a Sunday afternoon, something that I did not want to do. I'd have much rather stayed at home and watched the marvellous new invention that we had called a television. But my mother took me out, and in the walks she'd point out things of interest, either the wonderful variety of trees on the Stray or the great public buildings that the town boasts, the churches, for instance, so many of them. Why so many? I didn't understand about the denominations then, of course. But it really sparked my interest in the community. And later, during family holidays, which were usually either at Scarborough or some other popular seaside resort, I noticed that when my parents filled in the registry at the office of the hotel, when they put Harrogate as a place of domicile, there'd be some remark would be made by the lady behind the counter. Oh, you're very posh, you're from Harrogate. And I became aware of this. And a little later, some of the guests would call us the Harrogate people. And not in an unpleasant way, but in a humorous, gosh, you know, they must be special, they're from Harrogate. So that made me realise that there was something about the town that was indeed special. Then later, when I grew up and attended university and had my first professional post at Hereford, when the City Council commissioned me to start their first ever children's library service, I was away for some time, some years. But when I returned, what a shock I had. The beautiful railway station had been torn down, replaced with a tower block. Beech Grove had been completely distorted in its scale and buildings, and many other things had gone. Victoria Avenue had, in my opinion, been defiled by the insertion of a number of boxes that had replaced previously good and sound Victorian buildings. So I thought, well, what's this song I'm hearing some people singing? What has happened to Harrogate? What have they been doing? Where's the place that once we loved? Has it gone to rack and ruin? People say in the world today, you must keep up to date, but tell me, please, what have they done to dear old Harrogate? That was the song. And so I joined the Harrogate Society. Now that had been set up in, I think, 1970 to oppose the new 5-phase traffic scheme that had been brought in. And that put me in touch with other people of a like mind. And when I said, well, how did all these changes happen? They said, well, if you want the background, go and see Lal Walker at the Harrogate Advertiser. He does the local history column. And in the event, I became a friend and became Lal's reader for his book on the Improvement Commissioners. Every week a new chapter, and I discuss it with him in his office. And those were the mornings when the town clerk thought Mr. Walker was alone by himself on a Saturday morning. And the town clerk would say some very interesting things about the new conference centre and the need not to publicise adverse news. I just give that away as a snippet of how interesting those Saturday morning talks were. Well, it was at this time that I took a real interest in taking up history. But before I did that, I also knew that I'd got my own references from the work I'd done at Harrogate Library. And it was then that I laid the background for the Harrogate Great Chronicle, which, thanks to Hornbeam Park Development's generosity, came out in 2005. And ever since then, I've been working on a sequel, which covers the history of the town from 1842, when the pump room was opened, through to 1923. Now, you may think, ladies and gentlemen, that's an odd date to end the second part of my histories. But 1923 was... I didn't want to do the Great War, you see. It was such a repulsive thing. I had such a horror of investigating it and writing it that I thought I'll end in 1914 with Harrogate at the peak of its perfection. But I knew that was a cowardly thing to do, a cop-out. I had to cover the Great War. But when did the Great War end? From Harrogate's point of view, not in 1918, because of the influenza epidemic. It had to be 1919, perhaps, with the peace celebrations. But what about the Great Reconstruction Plan that had been launched even before the Great War ended? So I picked 1923, when the Reconstruction Plan came to an end. This is something the Council and the Harrogate Medical Society together had launched. So I thought 1923 is a good date to end. And of course it was also the year the War Memorial was unveiled. So that is why I picked that date as a particular suitable one to end. Now I'd like to finish my remarks on Wells and Swells by noting that it contains more than a history. I have been trying, as has the Civic Society and many other people, to have certain improvements made in the town, which alas have never happened. So I've put messages in the book for the future. And it's up to the future to decide whether or not it will implement them. Just one example. The director of the Royal Hall and Conference Centre in the 1970s ordered the cutting down of a magnificent beech tree at the junction of Ripon Road and King's Road. And I have been trying for decade after decade to have one tree planted, but people are sympathetic, but nothing is done. So that's why these things that I believe in have been incorporated in a discreet way, and sometimes not so discreet, into the text of Wells and Swells. And also one final thing. It may be that this book, or this pair of books, which I'm afraid I can't lift now, they're so heavy, there may be in it the making of a Harrogate, not myth, but a mythos, an outlook to the whole town and its history, what it is. But that's for the reader to interpret. I'm not going to go any more into that. So it's with unbounded thanks to Hornbeam Park Developments for making this publication possible. I'm going to give you a short slide presentation from this chair in a couple of seconds. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. That was the cover of... No. Sorry, I will get this right in a second. I want to go back to the beginning. There we are. That's the title. I'll get used to this in a second, ladies and gentlemen. That is the cover of the Harrogate Great Chronicle, which Carnegie Publications issued in 2005. And it tells the story in great detail of early Harrogate and has all the primary source materials reproduced on a compact disc within it. Now, I didn't adopt that process for the second part of the series because there was just too much documentary information to include on a compact disc. So critical selection became absolutely paramount. That was the Improvement Commissioner book written by Lowell Walker, and it covers the years up to the incorporation of the borough in 1884. So you might think, well, why, as Lowell Walker's done it, why cover that period in your own book? But the truth is, so much new information came to light, especially during my researches at the Duchy of Lancaster, that I thought you've got to go over the Improvement Commissioner period, putting forward the new material, without all Lowell Walker's detail. Well, the pump room really began the Improvement Commissioner period. It opened in 1842, and it was at this time that the other aspect of the spa, the Bath Hospital, was being developed for the sick poor of the United Kingdom. That's a view before the rebuilding in the 1880s. But you can see the old Magnesia Well pump room on the left-hand side. And that brought a lot of people to Harrogate who would not normally have been in the town. At this time also, the private initiative really developed. Private initiative really developed with such things as the water company. Now, these companies were set up by local people using local resources and local financing. They kept the control within the town by the local people. So that was a very important exemplar, the private water company. Their offices were later taken over by, that would be better, by Powell Edison solicitors. Thank you. Similarly, the gas company, another entirely private concern. Lakeland now occupy that site in James Street, but that was the original headquarters of the Harrogate Gas Company, set up by local people. The distribution network was local, and of course it was controlled, the financing was controlled locally. It was a private company, not a municipal one. The railways added to the growth of the town when, in 1848, the Brunswick line reached the Brunswick station at the Prince of Wales roundabout. So that brought in a huge new influx of customers for the spa. Now, at that time, the only spa baths were in private hands, such as the Montpellier or Crown Baths. They were on the site of today's Royal Baths, and they were started by the Crown Hotel to take advantage of the income from visitors to the spa. And some people said, well, Harrogate ought to have its own suite of baths, never mind the Crown Hotel milking all the profits. And so this laid the idea of Harrogate having its own suite of baths. Growing urbanisation at this time meant that hotels such as this one, the Queen, were able to develop its properties to the rear by developing Queen Parade, where a number of beautiful villas were built. And that really was another example of the role of the hotelier in the developments of Harrogate. Harrogate's population at this time was about 4,300 people. And that meant that the Victoria Park Company, which was established in 1860, was able to formulate a plan to link the two communities together, High and Low Harrogate, with, of course, its central railway station. That's a picture of the old Central Railway Station, which opened originally in green fields because the Victoria Park Company hadn't been able to urbanise all its holdings in land. But of course, when that was opened, it meant that other urbanisation could occur, such as the market and the new Victoria Baths. The new Victoria Baths opened in 1871, and they were a municipal development, not one by the private sector. The Improvement Commissioners wanted to get a share of the profits that the spa was creating. That building was now the council offices in Crescent Gardens, which is currently being redeveloped. But in 1871, when it opened for business, It was really the centre of the spa, far bigger than any of the private baths. Within 4 years, it was followed by the market. The improvement commissioners laid the foundation stone of the market at the end of Cambridge Street, with a clock tower added in 1877. Now, the population by now had grown to 9,500, so it was really expanding. And there's the finished market with Beulah Street on the right. The building on the right is still there, but the market has been replaced several times since that photograph was taken. The population, as I say, was 9,500, big enough to become an incorporated borough. So in 1884, Harrogate became a municipality with its own mayor, local elections, warding. Before, the improvement commissioners, the whole town had voted them, but after 1884, the wards produced their own representatives. There was also a need for larger public facilities. So a third hospital was built, the infirmary, in Belmont Road in 1883, which is now St. Peter's Schools. And 4 years later, it was decided to improve the footpath that led between the Sulphur Well and the Boggs Field by creating the Valley Gardens. You can see how primitive they were before work began, just a footpath. But after the 1887, the Valley Gardens were laid out properly and planted. And much of this was the work of David Simpson. And you can see some of the additions to the original gardens that were made as the council, which had come into creation then, bought extra land to improve the gardens. One of the town's greatest citizens and mayors, David Simpson, was the councillor who built the Duchy estates, almost single-handedly with his company. That was the first Duchy house to be put up at the corner of Ripon Road and Duchy Road. But of course, as we all know, it spread considerably to incorporate many other avenues and streets. Kent Road, for instance, York Road. And by the time the majority of this work was going on, the population in 1891 was now 13,000. And a lot of middle-class housing was built at this time, especially on the Bilton Grange estate. And there you can see a plan of the Bilton Grange estate before the builders got their hands on it. This had been one of a big property sales in Harrogate, but it wasn't just on Bilton that this kind of housing was being provided. Very good standard. The Franklin estate was another. Well, the last great service that Alderman Richard Ellis provided Harrogate was the key to developing the Royal Baths, which opened in 1897, the same year as Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And having opened this in 1897, it was only a matter of time, few years, before the Kursaal was opened. They started the building in about 1901, and by 1903 it was up and finished. And the Harrogate Municipal Electricity Works had also been established at the same time, in 1891. Now, the council started this, so it was the Municipal Electricity Works, and it meant that the Harrogate people had control over the electricity supply. So when, for instance, in 1931, the height of the Depression, because Harrogate owned the methods of distribution and manufacture for electricity, when the residents of New Park said they can't afford the price of electricity, the council listened and brought the price down. You could do that when you were in control. We lost that when, after the Second World War, it was nationalised and made bigger and bigger and bigger. Similarly with the Harrogate water supply. When you lose control and others are in charge of the financing, they set the price, not you. And this is what happens when things get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it might be the same thing is going to happen next year again when North Yorkshire exists and Harrogate Council no longer exists. I have my doubts about this, I must say, but I'm not here to talk about the future. Harrogate Electricity Works, I think the building's now partly the Harrogate's. There's a health club which has occupied it. But that was a very successful municipal venture, as were the schools. West Riding didn't control education. Harrogate did, and Harrogate built schools, such as this one at Oatlands. They also built Grove Road when the need to increase the educational provision in the town was manifest, when the estates around St. Luke's Church were developed. So all local things. In 1901, Starbeck came back into the municipal boundary, and the population had now grown to 26,500 people. That meant the Starbeck waters were once again under the control of Harrogate Borough Council. So they built reservoirs under the Stray to enable the water to be pumped up to High Harrogate before it gravitated to the Royal Baths to boost the supply of water there. The private sector, encouraged by all this wealth, built the Grand Opera House in 1900. William Peacock's theatrical company were the ones who ran it. Other private sector examples at this time, covered by Wells and Swells, was the Hotel Majestic of 1901 and the even bigger Grand Hotel of 1903, which, like the Majestic, had gold on its dome, but it had 8 domes, all covered in gold leaf, a sign of the wealth and ostentation, if you like, that the private sector was bringing to the town. Well, the improved methods of scientific analysis at this time meant that more and more treatments were brought in, like the Vichy baths, the peat baths, the Plombier treatments, all of which had an increased customer take-up for the visitors. The mud treatments, at first they used mud imported, but later they got it from Ripley. The Plombier treatments, the inhalation or atomization treatments for nasal complaints, the Schnee or 4-cell treatments, the Nauheim treatments, which were very popular right up to the 1960s. But plain water was also not neglected at this time, and the gigantic series of water reservoirs begun by Alderman Fortune got underway with 10-acre, Beaverdyke and Round Hill. There was a strict routine for the visitors in these days, whereby you got up before breakfast, exercised in a completely traffic-free zone around the Royal Pump Room, returned to take breakfast, and then took whatever treatments you required or entertainments had been arranged. And Crescent Gardens and surrounding streets washed twice a day by the municipality to ensure the ladies' long gowns were not spotted with dust. There's another view of the pedestrian-free Crescent Road. And 1911, I think that was taken just before the Great War, again, Crescent Gardens. And these were the days when there was talk of having a municipal palace to replace the old building. And there were the designs for the Victoria Avenue building, complete with clock tower. In 1914, the Kursaal was found to be in need of extension. So there were plans for extending it at the back, where the famous garden parties took place. You couldn't just go in, you had to book for the Kursaal garden parties. The corporation maintained an exquisitely maintained lawn with a orchestron from which the musicians played to entertain the visitors. And the last one was given on the 4th of August, 1914. During the Great War, the Grand Duchess George of Russia and her daughters set up military hospitals in Harrogate to help wounded soldiers. And many of the treatments that were introduced to the spa date from these years when, for example, the whirlpool baths were introduced, which were used to treat the limbs of soldiers who'd had war wounds with their extremities, their legs and arms, and they were very effective. Well, there you can see the recruits marching along Station Parade in 1914. And there's the whirlpool baths that were used, ironically, to treat them when some of them returned with war wounds. The Harrogate tank was but one of many things exhibited in the public places of the town to raise money in aid of the war effort. And these were also the years when Professor Swells was carrying out his detailed analysis into the spa waters and how they could be used to treat ailments of the time. And when Professor Swells' report came out in 1919, the population was just about 38,500. And at this time, the corporation decided it had to implement the government's instructions for municipal housing. And the Knaresborough Road social housing scheme was developed, which you can see there. The first houses were ready for occupation in 1921. Julian Clifford, the director of music at the Kursaal, or Royal Hall, it had been renamed, died in 1921, which meant a new age was introduced to the Royal Hall, and that really saw many changes. The Harrogate Medical Society wanted changes to the way the spa was administered and improvements. Their main recommendations were that the doctors should be consulted with the new treatments when they were introduced. The main streets should be colonnaded with glass roofs to protect pedestrians from the sometimes adverse weather here. More improvements for the parks and gardens, more public music in public places, and improved lavatory provision throughout the town. And many of these were actually provided by the council. Well, the Harrogate to London air service began in 1919, which took as many as 3 passengers from the Stray to London, it being believed that only the very wealthy would afford this service. And this was an idea never quite forgotten by the council until the 1930s. Well, Valley Gardens were, of course, the centre of many of the visitors' activities, and you can see there the gardens in 1920, which is only 3 years before Wells and Swells comes to an end. I mustn't end without mentioning one special facet of Wells and Swells, and that is it deals in detail with the life of Samson Fox, particularly the last decades. So that really does include much of his achievements for the last 3 decades of his life. So that really covers, very briefly, the end of Wells and Swells as a book. Other than saying it gives me enormous pleasure to invite the worshipful, the Mayor of Harrogate, to accept a copy of Wells and Swells.
A copy of Wells and Swells. Thank you very much. This is just here. 2 volumes. So thank you very much. Thank you.
How does anybody follow that? And not scripted, but I couldn't help sitting there but thinking what an amazing opportunity there is for the Civic Society to pick up on so many of Malcolm's comments and make sure that we do this town proud in the future. We almost need a moment's quiet, don't we, just to reflect on the past and reflect on what all those people did that we just do tend to take for granted, and to reflect on the fact that one man has made it his life's work to commit all this information for us to pick up and take away. But on our agenda next is something quite different. Those of you who are observant will see that to my right there is an easel covered with a sheet. And I'm going to invite the Mayor to join me at that easel to unveil a portrait that one of our members, Matthew Wyatt, has painted. It's amazing. I've been privileged to see it, and we're going to unveil that in a moment. And I'm also just going to draw your attention to a painting that is on the left, which is of Malcolm's library, which is, I'm told, although it looks finished to me, I'm told it's work in progress. There are still another 400 books to illustrate in that. And Matthew is amazing in the way he works in the community. He calls himself a community artist, and I'd like the Mayor to join me to unveil the portrait of Malcolm. Thank you.
Sorry, it's still wet, so that's why it's a bit of care needed.
First of all, may I say how delighted myself and the Mayoress are to be pleased to be here today at the launch of Malcolm's latest book, Wells and Swells. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Malcolm for his contribution in researching and producing this book and its value to all studying the history of the town. And thank you very much, Malcolm, for your kind donation. I shall be one of those students and reading the book. I understand that the book covers the golden age of Harrogate during the period 1842 to 1923 and is astonishingly comprehensive. It is obviously a piece of monumental work covering, I believe, over 1,600 pages. Congratulations, Malcolm, on completing this huge task. And once again, thank you for your kind gift. I would also like to take this opportunity of thanking Chris Bentley of Hornbeam Park Developments for sponsoring this event. This is much appreciated. Thank you very kindly, and thank you everybody for being here today.
So, nobody can say they don't know the name of the new book. They know what's in it. All that remains is for you to purchase it. That would be fantastic, but with some of the troubles in Europe, there was a delay in paper being delivered to the printers, and there was a delay in the printing. But the book is now printed, but unfortunately the bulk supply of copies are en route. Nevertheless, thanks to Anna at Carnegie working really hard and persuading the printers in Poland to airlift some copies to us, they arrived at the hotel yesterday. We were able to check that they were all okay, and we have a few copies here today on a table over there that you are free to just browse, but not to take away. What we do have, however, is a slip of paper. If you would like to place an order, then the publisher will make sure the copies get to you as soon as possible. And because I'm stood here in my role as chairman of the Civic Society, I can't let the Friends of Malcolm, who are not members of the Civic Society, depart without at least looking at our display, looking at some of our sample newsletters, seeing on the board at the back a little bit of the work we are doing, working actively with the authorities. We're actively working at the moment with the station gateway designers. We're doing our best for Harrogate, and if anybody feels they would like to join the society, they're very welcome, of course, to do so. So how does one end a morning like this? Well, just by saying, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Mayor and the Mayoress. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Malcolm. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. Thank you.